Okay, so we are now recording. Let me just share my screen as well, just for a moment. Okay, so that should be on your devices. So welcome to our weekly call. Thanks for joining. Hope you have a lovely weekend. As you can see from the title screen, we're going to be talking about associated IP prefixes for domain names, if I can say it properly, which I'll come back to in a second. Firstly, just a reminder to me to thank DNS, the long-time sponsors of the call, for their support, which is very much appreciated. So the plan for the call today, in a second, I'll hand over to so David and Tommy. I don't think John is on. So David and Tommy to talk about their internet draft and the topic more generally. And then, as always, I just sort of pick up a few sort of the news headlines, some sort of forthcoming deadlines, forthcoming events, etc. And time permitting at the end, I'll just pause to see if anyone's got anything else that you would like to mention, and obviously make good use of the chat as well, which people tend to do, which is marvelous. You may recall when we sort of had our two recent sort of panel discussions on zero touch and the DNS, and in fact previously it talked about the same topic, the need for so discovering the relevant IP prefixes for different applications arose, I think, independently, both by so Microsoft's ZTDNS implementation and also ADAMnetworks Don't Talk to Strangers implementation. And I think that led to the draft that we're going to talk about. So without further ado, let me stop sharing my screen. As I say, we got at least two of the three co-authors on the call, David and Tommy. I'll share in the chat a link to the associated internet draft just for reference as well. But without further ado, David and Tommy, hand over to you, and look forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew, and I'm glad to be reconnecting here today. And Tommy has really been an incredible source of inspiration, I would say at the very least, for all that he's done in the past with the IETF, and really was instrumental in authoring the details and the way that the IETF needs to see it. I would definitely like him to offer his perspective here as much as possible today, Tommy. But you did mention that it's early morning for you, so I'll jump in with just a few thoughts, and then maybe you can just criticize them or add additional insight. But maybe I can just provide a background briefly to those that might be interested in why this is even necessary, which is this, that when you apply DNS at the root of trust is a way to think about it, where every outgoing connection needs to first be resolved in order for that destination to even be reachable, is that we run into no problems for applications that we call nicely behaving. And then behind the scenes for years, we've been keeping track of what we call misbehaving apps. And it's those misbehaving apps and services that this is really designed to address, so that there is a standards approach where app authors can supply additional IP address space that is going to be used by the application in a legitimate way. So that's kind of the background as to why this is even necessary to begin with. Tommy, is there anything that you wish to add there?
That pretty much covers our initial discussion at DNS.org, I think. The the interesting challenge is that there exists this need to understand what usually product, right? Completely abstracted from networking technology, what product a given endpoint is associated with when it isn't serving connections over TLS and it's not doing something that can be strongly asserted today. Because endpoints that ought to be able to do that should reside in A and quad A records, meaning that for this domain name, this is the endpoint, as opposed to this endpoint does something like multimedia casting or something else that it doesn't authenticate the name, but we all know that if you're going to use this product from this vendor, you need to allow this endpoint. And that's an existing problem for firewalls, but it's commonly it's domain names now that people want to identify. And most things are. There's a lot of products that don't actually have any IP addresses specifically or CIDRs that need to be allowed. They just have domain names. So for those that don't, and that have IP addresses or CIDRs, it's beneficial to be able to say, look, at runtime for systems, when we encounter this domain name, we expect that we're also going to encounter these endpoints. And right now, that is a closed garden vendor per vendor approach in distributing that information, which, as David said, standards based is better for everyone.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you, Tommy. I can bring up some of the approaches now, or some of the applications to help everyone understand the kinds of stuff that does that does call for the need for this. So we have an example where websites that use an FQDN generally don't have that issue, as Tommy pointed out. But we have a lot of legacy applications that do have static IP references. And this happens to be in a lot of enterprise applications that were built 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so they have baked into their public FQDN JavaScript direct reference to IP addresses. And some of them would even, that I've approached about this, would even defend that as being a purposeful security policy. But I don't think that's something that is going to be sustainable any longer, especially because there are even requirements like from Apple iOS. You cannot use direct IP references, and you have to be dual stack compatible. And there's a lot of requirements nowadays for an app to be published. So I think the idea in the past of using IP references instead of a resolvable DNS name is not something that is long-term sustainable. So that would be one class. Another legacy issue that we discovered was browsers that hang on to time to live. And I think your implementation might be a little bit different that you led at Microsoft, Tommy, than ours, in that we actually collapse the open hole after a period of time to live. And so where we noticed that to be a problem was in particular Internet Explorer. And okay, in 99% of the end user cases, it's not being used as a browser anymore. But in the enterprise, that's amazing how many of our manufacturing industries still have applications that run on IE with ActiveX controls. And so that's another place where we saw that this is breaking, especially if you collapse the outgoing time to live. And then some of the things that we saw in common with you, Tommy, was applications like WhatsApp that do their stun check via directly by IP address and don't use DNS name. And the defense there by the application vendors is that they don't that the end user has very little patience for the extra milliseconds it might take to do a DNS lookup. And so they really want the stun and turn traffic to be direct by IP address. And so that happens to be quite common with a number of VoIP applications. But it's also, interestingly, not a requirement in Signal, for example. So Signal does not depend on it for voice calls one-on-one, but it does for group calls. right? WhatsApp requires it for individual voice video calls and group voice and video calls for both. So the implementations of the different apps are different. And then, of course, there's the RCS, which I don't even know what RCS stands for, but that's the new rich text messaging that's interoperable between iOS and Android. And that turns out that Google said, "Hey guys, we'll go ahead and take care of all the relays for you, and here are the IP addresses that we're going to use." It's not publicized anywhere last time I checked, so that was something that we ended up just doing by discovery. So it's I wish they would at least implement one FQDN query before enacting RCS, but so far the Google RCS relay service that they offer every carrier does not do any FQDNs whatsoever. So the only way you can figure that stuff out at the moment is to do discovery. Um, did I? Is there anything else you want to add to that, Tommy?
Nope, that pretty much straightforward. Like you said, I I think this mechanism is necessary for a number of reasons. One of them was in the context of my previous employment, seeing the context that Windows ZTDNS was running in. Like you said, we don't have the TTL related problem, or rather, they do not have the related TTL problem. But everything else you said is in their same concern bucket, right? There's a long right tail of things doing odd things. And it would be really easy for us to say, stop doing that, replace those applications, start doing targeted proxying. But at the end of the day, as we were discussing on the list actually with Ben Schwartz a little while ago, at the end of the day, we don't get to tell customers what they can validly do with applications. And for many customers, they don't have a choice in how they update or modify applications or the services they contact. And using proxies to do boundaries can be useful for other reasons, but knowing which things to put through which proxy just kind of circles back to the original problem, which is how do I know what this endpoint is associated with? Whether you're using this draft or not, you still have to distribute that information.
Right, right. So the draft, yeah, I don't know that I have anything else to add except somehow I want to communicate that if there is no association, no signal of any association at all, then that is problematic as far as the application or the deployment of this zero trust approach takes. So you probably have a better way to communicate that clearly, but let's use the RCS example, right? There is no FQDN, so how do you create that association?
I will just to add to that. I'll pull in the chat. Alexei pointed out RFC 3123, which is an experimental draft that defines something similar, but just less structured. That says, hey, here's a new RR type. It contains CIDRs for reasons. Let people use them how they will. This draft doesn't specify what those need to be. And so it's very open-ended, and it has a mechanism by which you can define ranges with exceptions, like exclusions of different parts of a range. And this draft does end up defining something that looks kind of like that, but with more restriction on how you define things so that it's easier to parse without introducing security concerns, in our opinion, as well as introducing the concept of port numbers, so that you can specify that, hey, this endpoint is only associated with this domain name in the context of these port numbers, because that's a common thing today. It's not that the entire server is dedicated to a product. It never is anymore. But other than that, they look awfully similar. The point of the record is to convey a list of CIDRs. In context of what the actual anything else concrete that the draft talks about. I'm just switching over to it real quick to see if there was any interesting detail that we had not already covered. I don't think so.
Well, there's the typical Tommy stamp that it's going to need to be DNSSEC signed.
Of course, things should be.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's for obvious reasons, well, because if it's the risk that you introduce by not requiring the signature is that a man in the middle could basically open up a security vulnerability, a significant one.
Given this is for a sort of a zero trust related implementation,
Right.
seems eminently sensible to sort of tie it down with DNSSEC, in my opinion.
Ralph.
Yeah, thanks. So I must admit, I was on vacation during ITF 1 to 3, so I haven't read the draft actually. Apologies. But from what I hear now, I think the mechanism pretty much, you have a domain, and from that domain you then convey CIDRs that people can connect directly. Is that roughly one sentence description?
Yes. So as written, because as you know, a -00 is always open to modification by a long ways. But as written, it has a signal available in a service binding record, so that because these records may be large, let's say you have a lot of CIDRs associated, that you can do a standard quad A service binding query, because we suggest that is becoming a standard triad today, that the service binding record set will tell you, P.S., there are some CIDRs records available if you want them, if you're not querying them by default. And then you go retrieve those if you care about that. And the idea is that the A and Quad A records are valid endpoints for services that use that domain name. But these associated endpoints are things that basically convey, if you were looking these names up for their endpoints, then you likely care that you're also going to see traffic going to these other endpoints as a result, for one reason or another, even though they're not valid A quad A values.
So that's sort of an additional security mechanism. The thing I want to bring up and is that pretty much everybody can publish anything in the DNS, and everybody can pretty much easily get a user in to go into a certain URL. I mean, that's how attacks usually works these days. I think there needs to be an additional mechanism, and that's probably not in the draft, but it might be mentioned in the security part of it, that you have to either give the user or the operator or the vendor of the security solution a possibility to do a black and white list of which of these things to accept, because I think just bluntly accepting all of them, I mean, I can think of an attack from the top of my head.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tommy.
So we at least start into this topic. Under the security considerations, we talk about suspiciously large IP address sets. It's not like there is a very easy rule there. But right now it says things like domain owners should not have prefixes and CIDR records that include multiple ASNs to avoid looking suspicious to clients. And name owners should not create CIDRs that include every IP they own just because this is also a domain name they own. They should be scoped by product. From the client side, part of it is baked in simply that the client has no burden. By the server sending these, there's no implication. There's no normative implication for a client to say, oh, and now I have to do something. So if a client wants to be more security minded, it can simply not trust that assertion and be done with it, or not query those records in the first place. But then if it wants to know, and it says that these are associated, by having at least DNSSEC signing, we can reduce the attack to malicious name ownership like the name owner has decided I'm going to overclaim, but it won't be an attacker overextended. And then from that point, yes, we probably do need more discussion. So, insert the standard, PR is welcome, come take a look. But I'm glad to hear you had some time off during 123. It was a good summer for that.
So, and then maybe just there was a follow-up question, I think, in the chat. If Akamai is serving stuff from their own network, from CDN nodes inside the IP. I mean, it only affects if we are serving stuff on IP based. And most of the stuff that we do is DNS based. So don't think it applies to us. But I mean, you could certainly think of services where CDNs do stuff for different kind of IPs. But if they have different IPs, I mean, I guess they would be in different binding records for the service. I don't think that's a particularly difficult one to solve.
So I will point out that this is not a novel concept. If you are a CDN and you have lots of different customers, small customers that you've got on a free or lower tier, and they're all being served from the same IP address because they all get like 1 gig and 1% of memory and time slicing on the CPU of a given server. All of them will have A and quad A records that point to the same IP address. Maybe all those things also have CIDR records that contain the same ranges, meaning the semantics of this record need not imply that these endpoints are exclusively for this service. They signal, because you're interested in this service, you will probably expect to see these also. My concern, so I'm going to do live from the chat. My concern is more the opposite. If I get an answer back and it's a list of CDN ranges on 443, how do I ensure I'm only granting access to the one app and not many other things hosted on CMI page? Okay, so this jumps ahead to the assumption, and a reasonable one, since both Microsoft and ADAMnetworks have taken this approach, is to say, if I'm using that as a blanket allow list, how do I ensure that by allow listing that I'm not actually allowing a bunch of traffic that wasn't associated with that domain name? So I'll point out again that this is the same problem as A and quad A records. If I query for name.example and I get back an IP address in a quad A record, and I choose to allow list that IP, then I've also just allow listed everything hosted on that IP. And so I would say that concern is orthogonal because it has to be solved regardless of which record type the IP address came back in. Whether it's something that you do by a port number because your life happens to be as simple as web server versus other server. We know it's not. They're all web servers. So in that context, you've got to be doing something else like endpoint management with source application, for example. But this draft can't solve that.
All right.
Anything
I would
else,
also,
David?
yeah, no, I think that was very well articulated. I would also add in my response to Ralph would be that in real life, the application of this, I don't think would be applied without a protective resolver being part of the picture. And so to your point that anybody can create any record and then deceive an end user to go to a would-be first stage phishing site. Yeah, absolutely. But a protective resolver does also play a contributory role to minimize that.
Yeah, so this is very much sort of part of a zero trust solution. So it's providing a bit of the jigsaw, but it's by no means all of the jigsaw, which I suppose we ought to just remember that. I've got a question for you, then I'm going to refer to Paul. Question first, the point you raised about the sort of instant messaging type apps, David, I think it was. Is that something that could usefully be flagged to the MIMI working group, or is it sort of unrelated to that? I don't know if you or Tommy have an opinion on that, or for that matter, anybody else that's on the call.
I don't have an opinion on that. I mean, I would have my wishes by being involved both on on the standard as well as an application of it. In a perfect world, we would have fewer of these possible overlaps where that you're describing. So if that is an option, I don't have an opinion, but if that's an avenue for socializing an idea of better architecture, that sounds interesting.
Okay. I don't, I suppose, yeah, all I was just wondering was whether that was something that was specified within sort of MIMI or is totally unrelated. Maybe that's a discussion for outside of this call. Okay, look, Paul has put a question in the chat. If he gets an answer back and it's a list of CDN ranges on 443, how do I ensure I'm only granting access to the one app and not many other apps hosted on the same IP ranges from the CDN, which, yeah, you just posted, which Tommy touched on. Is there anything further that you wanted to add to that, either of you? Because clearly, otherwise, that is a worry. If
Yeah, I mean,
it's all right to
right.
pick on Outflare, so not pick on Akamai all the time, but maybe someone else's future employer. Is that an easy way to create an unnecessary problem?
Yeah, I think Michael Richardson answered the way Tommy would have liked to answer as well. Just get IPv6 everywhere. That's how you resolve that. But we're not going to get there probably ever. So in the meantime, we do have to mitigate that. It is very real. So in addition to what Tommy said, I'd like to add that as long as the boundary is around the device, that is a real risk. But if there's a way to draw the boundary around application groups, then that's minimized. And I think we'll see much more development in that space as a result of the sole zero trust DNS, don't talk to strangers, being adopted.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I see Tommy is in violent agreement with that. Okay, anybody else got any other sort of questions? As I said, I posted a link to the sort of draft in the chat, which, since I don't think if you join later on, you can see the you can see the historic chat. Unlike with MeetEcho, I just popped that back in for reference, and obviously I'll post that with a link to the recording. But anyone else got any immediate thoughts on this? Doesn't look like it. In which case, I'm guessing maybe this might come up in Montreal, perhaps. Has it been to Gen Dispatch or a dispatch, not Gen Dispatch?
No, it was sent to DNSOP mailing list. We strategically chose not to present it because the list discussion was dynamic enough that presentation would not have been useful for anybody. We need to be able to probably rev a -01 that will be focus the feedback a little bit. Right now, the feedback's all over the place, and it's like, okay. Right now, what would be really helpful is for people to continue the discussion on DNSOP. And I say continue knowing that I also kind of, we all get a little tired after the IETF meetings. David and John and I need to issue a -01, but a lot of the discussion going on is, well, this is a horrible idea because, and it's like, okay, and that can be useful. But as I was teasing earlier, Ben and I went back and forth several times on various points. That conversation basically comes down to, we shouldn't have to do this. And what we're saying is, yes, but in real life, there are situations where we do have to do this. So either a lot more people agree with Ben and no one's saying it, and that would be good signal. Or there are people who agree that it needs to be done, and that would be good signal. Or the most valuable is, well, it might be useful, but I have this concrete problem with it, like the security considerations that we need to expand. And that's the best signal. something we can use to increase the document version number with content that the group will find more valuable, less offensive, etc. So DNS op is where that discussion is being had.
Right.
If it comes up at 124 is a function of when we get the -01 and how people feel about it, if it's interesting enough to actually be there. But that is our goal, is to present at 124.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so if anyone's got any comments, as you say, as a minimum, whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, or even better, sort of more specific comments to augment what you already have.
Maybe I can add this as something that you pointed out in our email exchange, Tommy, and we didn't particularly address it here out loud, but if this doesn't become a standard, then the industry runs the risk of a vendor lock-in. And we all know what that looks like long term over important internet security concepts when that happens. And we'd rather catch very early on to say, let's avoid vendor lock-in as soon as possible if this is indeed a path that we're collectively agreeing upon will make it more difficult for a thief, right? And at the end of the day, that's what our job is, to make it more difficult for the thief.
Yeah, well said. And I see Michael's put a couple of comments in the chat about connecting to RFC 8520 and 9726, but looks like he will add further comments as he reads it. And is RFC 8520 a draft on multi-user dragons? There's a reference for the teenagers, if ever there was one.
So something else I want to bring up. So thank you, Michael, because I actually don't know what 9726 is off the top of my head, which is always a good sign for homework needed. The recent operational considerations for use of DNS in IoT things. Yes, it probably should. Awesome. Congrats on the publication, Michael. That has to be super, super recent. 9.7 as a prefix. Anyway, what I was going to say was that it should be common to plus one what David's saying about without something like this, vendors will go off and do their own thing, which is always generally true. And sometimes that's okay if something is truly vendor specific. But this is an extension of vendors documenting their endpoints needed for network firewalls. And it sucks that is frequently manual today. And the horror stories that I've heard from customers are, we get a call from the security operations center that says we have 30 minutes to update our list because vendor so-and-so just updated theirs. And that's a very derailing experience for us. But there really isn't a better way to handle it right now. That even if you could move like the bulk, like if you could move the common 80% case to using something like this, then you still have to do some for others. It would make a huge difference. That instead, what you're seeing is, Microsoft Zero Trust DNS implementation has been public preview now. There's no trade secrets or me having to represent them to show that the way it works is you have to manually distribute these lists if you want your endpoint doing anything other than allowing by domain name. And, that's workable because manual firewall endpoint updates have been workable, but that really sucks when you're not just talking about let's move those allow endpoints to firewalls and you have some set number of firewalls your enterprise manages, but now it's, hey, we have 250,000 devices. Let's push them all out to all of them all the time. Right. Your firewalls, a 30-minute SLA is something you can achieve, hopefully, unless you have some bigger problems. How often do your endpoints phone in? Because in my experience, it's many hours on average, let alone if, someone went on vacation and their devices disconnected, etc. Yeah. So Okay, that was the point said. I'd actually like to. I'm looking at the chat, Michael. There are multiple points that can be made with that. I'm curious, when you're talking about some users who can use WebRTC and others can't. That's exactly in line with the experience we have problems with if you can't distribute these. So
yeah,
huge plus one.
And
Yeah,
I actually had another thing, because we're having a debate in Ontario as the premier has told everyone to go back to the office 5 days a week, right? So do you think the office has that firewall? Yes. The home? No. So think about that from an incentive point of view. The office is harder to work at because it's got a good firewall. Right?
Yeah.
So I have to work at home 5 days a week because your firewall's too stupid for me to use. So maybe we shouldn't publish this, actually. David knows the debate because it's been all over the media for the last week, right?
Yeah. Michael and I live in the same provincial jurisdiction. Michael, I would argue that from a vendor's point of view and from a customer's point of view, that is up to the deployment to go smoothly, right? Because security ought not to unreasonably cause an inconvenience. Otherwise, if you're trying to use a hammer to kill a fly, there's a fundamental problem here that should be revisited. So this is really to help with minimizing that kind of a scenario.
That discussion makes me sort of wonder whether it'd be useful to reach out to some of the sort of well-known firewall companies, and I'm sort of not entirely randomly thinking of my good friend Arno at Broadcom. Maybe there could be a useful discussion there to see if there could be some collaboration as well, just as a thought.
Definitely, because I agree that we don't want to see bifurcation with on-site versus remote. I would point out, in my ideal world, it would be that firewalls, we should not have to differentiate between what endpoint cares about this information, right? If it's a traditional human at a laptop, if it's a server, if it's a firewall appliance, why aren't all of them using this? And then they do get a unified real-time view on these changes, right? Because in an on-prem deployment, the network firewall, if it looked a lot more like what ADAMnetworks is doing, where instead of using SNI inspection and other heuristics to determine a domain name, if it's doing the same thing that the endpoints are doing and basing on domain name lookups for their network, then they'll get the information at the same time. And that's what I would hope we can move toward. Definitely not having different mechanisms for the different scenarios, because then, yes, absolutely what you're describing, Michael, which is horrible.
I'll happily ping Arno a note after this then, and see if, as a starter for 10, someone from Broadcom could take a look as well. Because as you say, it'd be unfortunate if they looked at a totally different solution to solve the same problem.
I would add one more comment to the overall approach of doing security this way is not applicable universally. For example, I've never thought that a public hotspot should do zero trust DNS. Not today. We're not anywhere close enough for that to happen. And conferences absolutely should not. Can you imagine going to the IETF and then there's some kind of a constraint like this that prevents your particular overlay from working? So today where we're at is that it is an opt-in security model to protect end users and devices that are at risk.
Yeah.
So just to maybe, I mean, I'm agreeing with you, but just to maybe say something different. In the early 2000s, right, you could always find the newbies at IETF. They were the ones in the terminal room with Windows 2000 CD reinstalling their laptop because they had just been owned by malware, because they had actually never been on the internet before, and this was their first time on the public internet. And of course, their computer was used to being protected by a corporate firewall. Okay.
Right.
And so they just, didn't worry about it. Now, the world's changed a lot since then. So, laptops are much more mobile and are exposed much more often. And internal threats are probably as big or bigger than external ones. And I think Windows has gotten better too. But that was actually an interesting observation, right? That there were quite a large number of systems that actually were very vulnerable because they were, I'm going to say, what's the right word? From COVID times, they were unvaccinated, or they don't have herd immunity. That's the word I want, right? Yeah. And I don't think we don't really get that in the internet, but
yeah, it was less than 20 years ago, Michael, to your point, that we actually measured how many seconds a Windows box could go online before it got owned, right? And it was measured in seconds by the time we stopped measuring that.
we stopped because there was no point, or because it got better?
No, I think because there was no point.
I mean, we have attosecond lasers available now, apparently, but
Right. Well, on that sort of positive note, make sure your firewall's up to date, amongst other things. Zero Trust could be quite useful as well in that regard. But thank you to David and Tommy. Please take a look at the draft and furnish any comments and suggestions, having read the draft on the so I guess the DNS Ops mailing list and or on GitHub, I'm guessing, whichever is your preference.
Yes,
Probably
in fact.
Go, Tommy.
Oh, I was just going to say I'll paste the link to the GitHub. Sorry, please go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, and your earlier request about the DNS op.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you both. Useful discussion, and good to see that there's maybe going to be a solution coming out of this that, as you both said, a standardized approach, far better than sort of vendor-specific proprietary solutions and vendor locking, etc. So this is a much better way of doing it. So fingers crossed, it works. Right. Let me just briefly go back to sharing my screen then. As always, we'll go from a really interesting discussion on that just to some of the recent headlines. Firstly, Karata, Colm Healy published a really interesting article on Tech Radar, just questioning the sort of benefits of encrypted client hello. There's a really interesting quote sort of partway in there that 17% of all ECH enabled sites are risky, and Chrome users with encrypted DNS enabled are most at risk. I've obviously taken that slightly out of context, so please read the article to get the proper context for that. But it's really just questioning whether it's making it's worsening security, but through the introduction of ECH, a topic which I've got or a thought which I've got quite a lot of sympathy with. Some of you will be aware, so that obviously drew my attention. So hence sort of putting that on the link. Also, Jeff Houston got a useful summary of the various DNS related discussions in Madrid last month at ITF 123, which would be really handy for Ralph amongst others, so he can catch up after his holiday. It put quite a lot of detail about the DELEG working group in particular, but also he just put a skeptical note about whether putting in encrypted transport for queries between sort of recursive resolvers and authoritative name servers is a good idea, and referenced previous concerns raised by Bert Hubert about the risk posed by increasing the complexity of DNS. And that was with reference, there was a side meeting. Those of you that were in Madrid will know that Sarah Dickinson co-hosted, so talking about ADOT and ADOC, DNS over the TLS and over QUIC, which got quite a lot of positive sort of support expressed during the meeting itself, and is a theme that will be picked up during I think the forthcoming OARC meeting, and in fact on this call in a few weeks' time, Sarah will come on to expand on that discussion. So if in preparation for that, just pose a question whether it's a good thing to pursue. So that was quite thought-provoking. And then the final one I just called out, I think, which was there's some useful stats. So ICANN, I'm sure you're all aware, are currently running a program to encourage people to apply for some of the new proposed global TLDs. And as part of that, there's the so-called application support program, which is intended to get more diverse applications from perhaps markets, sort of geographies that previously have been less involved with the sort of the GTLD program, with a lot of good sort of funding support to help move applications forward. But actually, not only have there been relatively few applications to take part in that program, of those, I think it's only 20 odd, a third of them have come from North America, whereas the sort of more targeted areas, sort of Latin America and particularly Africa, are fairly underrepresented. Just concerns whether that's going to be a successful program in terms of diversification. Okay, various other things which we won't have time for, but just maybe the one at the bottom, again, for Jeff Houston in the Decentralization of the Internet Research Group, DINRG, in Madrid. There was this discussion, obviously, about decentralization and how to measure centralization, and Jeff expressed the view that actually centralization was inevitable. It's economics, certainly inevitable for the internet. And to not put words in Jeff's mouth a little bit, but it's like trying to stop the tide come in. It will happen regardless. Jeff has expanded on that in a podcast on APNet, which has gone up recently. There's a whole bunch of other stuff which we won't have time for, but various things that caught my eye through the last week or so, including the US government taking a stake in Intel, of all things, which seems slightly strange. Also, perhaps one on the top of the page, a new deputy director at the NSA has been appointed. Those of us with an interest in that sort of thing. Oh, sorry, no, there was another one. And also, you see the one at the bottom, middle of the screen there. A developer got 4 years for creating a kill switch on an ex-employer's systems. So no matter how tempted you may be, if you depart from a company, certainly if you're in the US, don't do that. It could have quite adverse consequences for you. 4 years in prison is quite a lesson, I think. So just so you're aware. In terms of deadlines coming up, I thought the correction.
But IoT vendors that do that all the time to their customers. So 4 years for all of them.
Fair point. Yes, I suppose it's kind of like a kill switch, isn't it? Effectively,
yeah. I mean, okay, good. We have a precedent here. Okay.
Sounds like wishful thinking.
Yes, good. Interesting point, though. I hadn't thought of that in that way, Michael. But yeah, who knows? That will be a fun thing to put forward. A correction from what I circulated earlier, the deadline for the RSA submissions was actually yesterday, not today. So it's the 24th, not the 25th. Apologies, I got that wrong on what I sent out. There's an APNIC Foundation Research Fellowship, the deadline of which is coming up shortly. And one I've added since sending stuff out earlier, which is, because it only came to my attention mid-morning, which is on the academic side, the last but bottom of this screen, there's a PhD position on assessing DNS dependencies at scale, which is open for applications and open until the middle of September. So I'm highlighting that because that wasn't on what I circulated previously, just for your information. And there's other dates further out, so we won't go through those, but they're just there to remind you. In terms of forthcoming sort of things that are coming up, you'll see we got there's a DNS for a U webinar, which I saw coming up on the 3rd of September. So in a week or so, a couple of things I've added since we discussed this last time. Connected Britain at the end of September for anyone that's in the UK. At the end of the month, and also I thought I've added one which I can't immediately see. Last but one of the screen, because Alexei drew that to my attention, nog.fi, so in Finland on the 5th of November. So if you can't make it to Montreal and you're in Europe, then on the 5th of November, there's a meeting in Finland that could be of interest to you. And I think that's pretty much everything from me, other than say, reminder, we don't have a call next week. I should be on holiday in Lake Garda in Italy. So enjoying the sunshine, so I won't be on the call. And then the week after, we should be doing a preview of the agenda for the OARC 45 meeting. Which is coming up in just over a month's time now, in early October. So that should be good. So that is everything from me. Anyone got anything else that you want to raise? And if so, now's a great time to unmute and raise it, or pop it in the chat if that's easier. Seeing anyone unmuting? I don't think anyone's.
Well, I'll just comment that I had to step away and take a call from the vet, and so I used the little AI companion button on the bottom. It was offering to catch me up on the call, and I was actually, I'm a huge skeptic of AI. I was very pleasantly surprised that, it seemed actually kind of useful. So anyway, just a thought. Partly just playing with the buttons in the meeting, but
Yeah, why not? Yeah. All right, I've now pressed the button to see what it comes up with. It's thinking at the moment. So
it thinks for a minute, but like it seems to know what stun is. I don't know. I don't know how much it thought.
Oh yeah, and cider blocks and such like.
Yes. And, there's no video here, so it's just listening to the audio. I guess maybe, reading the captions, but.
Yeah, very good. I haven't pressed that button before, Vicky, so I have now. Very interesting.
Well, I partly pressed the button because personally I hadn't been speaking, so I wasn't too worried about it.
Yes, I know what you mean. And as Tommy said, it's made everyone sound very eloquent, which is as it should be. We'd expect nothing less.
I will say it made it sound as if the whole thing could have been like a 4-minute, 3-paragraph. And that's not a criticism of anyone. It's just it's interesting. Of course, I couldn't have asked it any questions that it didn't. Anyway.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
You're right. That is very interesting to see.
It doesn't seem to have looked at any of the chat though, which is probably comforting.
Yeah. So it's purely taking it from the audio feed by the look of it. yeah, well, as Tommy said, what could possibly go wrong with just summarising the discussions? Well, on that high note, then, thank you for pointing that out, Vicky. Thank you to Tommy and David for talking about the sort of good work that you're doing with your draft. I hope that was useful for everyone. Continue to enjoy the week, and fingers crossed some additional sunshine, even in parts of Canada, judging from what David said. And look forward to not seeing you this time next week. So don't forget, no call next week, but see you in 2 weeks to talk about the agenda for the forthcoming OR meeting in Stockholm in early October. So see you all then. Bye, everyone.
Hi.